There are currently 284,000 properties in Scotland that are at risk of flooding, and that figure is shocking. You know, that number is only set to rise over the next 10, 15, 20 years.
The climate is like a sleeping bear, and we've poked it with a very big stick. But it can do all sorts of crazy things.
But one of the biggest things that causes climate change is the heating and electricity that we use in our own homes. One of the good news stories is that there are two ways we can work with climate change. One is this thing, mitigation. So mitigation is saying we want to do everything we can to reduce climate change, and that's why we make buildings energy efficient and airtight, and we use heat pumps, and we look at natural materials and all of those sort of things. The most important thing you can do is insulate a building. Adaptation to climate change is where we can start to say, well, if it's going to become warmer, we're going to see more overheating. If it's going to become wetter, blocked drains and small gutters and all of these sort of things, that's going to become a bigger problem.
How bad it gets is very much in our hands now. Any bit of emissions avoided, even a small fraction of a degree, is going to help.
For a long, long time I sort of felt it's not something I can do a huge amount about. It's one home, it's one car, all of those kind of things. And a few years ago I started to understand more about the science behind it, I suppose. It became quite clear to me that actually all of our individual emissions do matter, even if they're a drop in the ocean. There are lots of drops.
It's a question of how long do we want humans to exist on the planet for, ultimately, and what are we prepared to change.
Nothing's a waste of time. Every effort counts. Every effort counts. Whether a coal-fired power station is turned off and a wind farm is switched on, but equally it counts when you turn off your gas supply and you switch on your heat pump. Decarbonisation needs to happen at every single level.
There is a way forward if we use our ingenuity and our creativity to drive change, then, you know, we could have this.
If your building is listed, two important things. You have a legal duty, if you own it, to maintain it correctly. And you also, if you want to make any changes, material changes to it, you need to get planning permission.
You know, in older stone tenements, it's really important you have things that are breathable, you know, because these buildings were constructed to a different philosophy almost to newer buildings.
Some of them are nearly 200 years old. They're starting to fall apart now because people are retrofitting with the wrong materials, and they're trapping the moisture. Even like the sort of plaster that they use, modern day plaster, that creates a moisture barrier. What's happened is this plaster is not breathable. These bricks are breathable. These bricks are porous, so moisture should be able to travel in and out through this wall, but it's getting blocked by this plaster.
So obviously when you're stripping back these walls, you find a lot of issues with gaps and old fireplaces, cupboards that weren't there originally. So a lot of stuff that you kind of can't really prepare for until you start going.
So there's extensive funding for heat pumps and insulation, but it doesn't seem to be the same amount of funding for maintenance.
To do with maintenance, no. It's fabric first.
Yeah.
There's no point in having wet insulation on a building. You're just holding the cold in.
Yes.
You've got to fix the roofs first of all.
I think that's the real meaning of fabric first, is fix the roof, fix the walls first before you start putting insulation or renewables in.
And that makes a huge difference to your energy costs as well if you've got a dry building.
I think there has to be something to be done, or the stock of buildings in Glasgow in particular, in our case, will eventually become unusable.
In the past, what people have done with making buildings more energy efficient is they said, oh, you've got single glazing, you need to make that double glazing, or your loft is not insulated, you need to insulate that, all of which is quite sensible. But the reason for a retrofit plan above anything else is simply so that somebody takes an overview of what will happen if you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 measures in that building. What will happen to moisture, what will happen to the heritage, what will happen to your energy bills.
If you walk around the house and you show me kind of where you think things could improve, or just to summarise your thoughts.
I'm quite interested to see where we're losing heat and things that we can do immediately to kind of address that. So, yeah, just cold air just blowing in, yeah.
Where do you start? Do you start with the nice things like changing your lampshades or, you know, putting a lick of paint on? But then you think, actually, once you start doing that, you kind of can't go back to the kind of fundamentals and think, let me look at my heating, let me look at my electrics, hot water, you know, how it's actually functioning from a non-aesthetic level.
So we got the home about 6 years ago and did quite a big renovation job on it. And at that point, didn't know anything about retrofitting and didn't think about it. So we had to solve a damp problem, we had to fix the roof, did a whole bunch of stuff. And didn't consider energy efficiency really as part of that, which is a real shame, because then I began to understand a little bit more about my responsibilities as somebody that does own a home, to make sure that my home's energy efficient. And realised there's stuff we probably could have done 6 years ago as part of that renovation job that would have been less expensive and less disruptive than it's going to be to have to do it now. Chris from Local Home came in, and the whole house plan was basically him coming around our home, looking at our radiators, pointing a heat gun at our ceilings, checking out our windows, where are the drafts, where are the cold spots, and he wrote that all up into a report with some pictures and some advice. And his advice were things like, we needed to upgrade our windows, and that was probably one of the first things we should think about. You know, we needed to think about draft proofing, and it just sort of set out some steps.
There's lots of information out there and lots of misinformation. It's hard to make sense of it all. So having an assessment from an independent assessor was really, really very valuable. It provides a good reference source of information. It's very empowering. So it gives you knowledge that you can then use to go and speak with installers.
Navigating Home Energy Scotland website was a challenge, and I think it requires a certain amount of persistence and kind of sticking with it. You have 9 months in which to do the work and complete it.
And claim the fund, and then get the second EPC done, because that's what needs to be submitted to Home Energy Scotland to claim the money.
So you do feel a bit like the clock is ticking.
It is an absolute minefield trying to get tradespeople in.
We've had more people visit than have ended up giving us quotes, some of which have been felt more viable than others. So again, we've gone back to Local Home to give us advice on what's been proposed and whether what they're suggesting is the right thing for the house or not.
Without the assessment, it would have been difficult to have intelligent conversations, to be an intelligent customer with the heat pump installers.
What's been really helpful actually about Local Home is, as well as the advice that you can buy in, there's a community of people that have done it already. So we've been to visit 2 of the members that have similar houses to this that have already put in heat pumps, and that's been as valuable as the advice we've got actually, to just reassure us.
I came first of all because I see the worth in this. I've been a builder for 20 years, and I know that the way that I know how to build is not necessarily in line with how we should be building in the future.
So then, I started getting this quite a good source of information.
Yeah, it's a big thing.
I grew up on a farm between Glasgow and Edinburgh, so like right in the centre of Scotland, in a place where it's generally through my whole childhood was a pretty standard, pretty safe, like no wild weather, just your traditional seasons like your spring, summer, autumn, winter. And now there's massive amounts of flooding. Like obviously Scotland's a stormy place and it's a rainy place, we know that, but it's so different already compared to childhood. You can feel the raise in the water table.
I've always been like involved in climate activism and things before I got into construction. I have less time for it now, but it would be nice if I was able to do something that was both construction related and also good for the environment, because a lot of construction work is incredibly bad for the environment and you see a lot of waste. And then it also just seems like a good opportunity generally, in terms of there's bound to be a lot of work going in retrofitting over the next decade at least.
When we were at high school, we knew that global warming was a thing and we knew that we had to do something about it, but it was like this distant issue that they would get round to, the government would deal with eventually. And now we're here and we're at the tipping point. You know, if change doesn't come in a very short number of years, we can't fix it.
It's lime based. It's going to be very mouldy. It's not going to go mouldy, you see. It's more environmental than using gypsum.
We are creating our internal wall insulation system, which is sort of designed to improve standards. Essentially it works with the building rather than against it and doesn't trap moisture inside the property. So it's a longer process and a much slower process.
This is sisal wool, friction fitted, fully natural insulation. It's made out of a plant grown in Tanzania, I believe. But the best thing about it is there's no waste. It's raw product. So every speck of waste now, like this here, will go back to be raw product and used again. Traditional methods throw away quite a lot of plasterboard, PIR, massive waste. You know, you're talking over 20%, and that's going to go in landfill.
Although you talk about retrofit, you can do retrofit with unsustainable materials. The lobbying that is on the side of these huge corporations who are producing very cheap but unsustainable materials is kind of throwing a spanner in the works, because if those materials aren't made sustainably, it's still going to cause the end of the planet. It's the way it's going to go.
Wood fibre, vapour open, and the carbon's far lower and not toxic.
It doesn't kill you if it sets on fire.
We have to have the next wave of people coming in with the relevant qualifications, with the relevant understanding of how to do retrofit and how to be more energy efficient in their building technique. We're all saying that there isn't enough people being directed into trades, and personally in the college I feel like the people who are being directed are not necessarily the right people. I think that we're all on the same page and we don't really have a voice. We don't have anywhere to voice this issue. That's a major problem.
There's this idea that there's an infinite amount of materials. You know, you buy a box of 1,000 screws, one screw down the back of the wall. Does that really matter? When I left school, I did end up doing an apprenticeship in joinery for 2.5 years, and I left that because I was like picking screws and nails out the dust piles, and my tradesman was like, "What are you doing, mate? You know, we don't have time to do that." So for a £10,000 project, for example, insulating your walls, you can get £7,500 funding from the government. That's fantastic. The problem is they don't have the tradespeople to do that, because the tradespeople need specific certification to be able to get that funding. That's a big problem in and of itself. We don't have a PAS 2030 yet. No. We're trying to get that certification so that we can do this.
No, it costs £5,000 a year annually, I think. So it's quite difficult for a smaller company to look at that and say that's an instant win.
We want everybody in our company to be able to install each measure that we do. So underfloor, loft, room and roof insulation and internal wall insulation. So for us to train one new installer, it might cost us 3,000 or 4,000 to get them the right certificates.
But it is really great that an organisation like Local Homes is getting funded by the government to do this fantastic work. Majority of tradesmen come from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Why would they be looking to fork out money to learn how to do something sustainably when they've got to worry about the bills to pay, children to feed, van to run? But more can be done, and more should be done, really.
the difference is dramatic. To, you know, even forgetting everything else, it's worth just doing the insulation in this type of home, because you really feel the difference in summer and in winter.
So there's a whole idea about fabric first. So you reduce the heat demand, the heat loss from your house by improving the fabric before you install a heat pump. But that applies whether you've got gas heating or oil heating. It doesn't matter what the heating source is. If you reduce the heat demand, you'll reduce your energy consumption. It's good across all types of heating. Homes like this, stone homes, are difficult to insulate. Underfloor is a good option as well. Our house, it's very hard to insulate underfloor. We have to lift the floors up, but a lot of homes you can get underneath. There's enough crawl space or standing space. If you can do that, do that. That's not too expensive.
Here you can see the underfloor insulation. So this is mineral wool. So it's netted below onto the joists. I mean, the underfloor insulation made a huge difference because it was done quite a while before the double glazing was done. Suddenly, the front of the house felt warmer. And that's the bigger area. That's where we've got the full height ceilings. So it was noticeable straight away, just that one thing.
It would cost just over £2,000. Okay. So I think the quotes I've had are between 2.1, 2.3 for just insulating the floor, labour and materials. So the grant is 1,500, and they give you another £500 of an interest-free loan, and then anything else you pay yourself. It's a good chunk. It's a really good chunk of money towards an easy, quick win, I think, that will make a huge difference to the heat loss in the flat. So that's my main priority.
It's much cheaper than double glazing. It has a bigger impact on your EPC as well. So, I mean, if you're only going to do one thing, you know, I would say do that.
This secondary glazing piece was on already, but the door doesn't fit very well. So there's a big gap up at the top here, down the sides, and there used to be holes in here where old locks had been, where there was just like a gale blowing through it on really windy days, and a gap at the bottom. So we just DIY'd it with some really cheap draft excluding material. So it's just just a foam runner. I just stuck it on the top, basically, of the door, and stuck it down the sides. So these draft excluding materials probably cost us less than £5. It was dead cheap to do. And we got the price for triple glazed windows, and it was just too much. We just couldn't afford it. So we've gone for double glazed windows, which Chris's report said if you could do triple glazed, it would be better. But you know, good modern double glazing was better than what we had. So that's what we went for.
The most common problem is that most people think just about the energy efficiency and about keeping themselves warm and about saving fuel bills, and they install insulation and it creates a problem with moisture. And there are lots of ways that you can detail things to be better than that, and that's why you have an overview. But another aspect of that is making sure that you have good ventilation.
It just didn't make sense to me to, after going through all these measures to upgrade the insulation and install the heat pump and fit new windows and make sure the house was sealed, to then knock a hole in the wall and just suck all the heat out and pump it outside. So this is the mechanical heat recovery ventilation system. It's basically an extractor fan. The moisture goes through this core and gets blown out. The heat gets captured in this core, and then the unit reverses the cycle and blows air in.
You want the air to be able to pass through above your insulation when it comes to insulating your roof. Like I say, insulation and ventilation coincide perfectly, don't they? They need to work together. So it's not just about one or the other. They need to both work together.
I mean, the temperature just sits at 19 degrees pretty much all the time. which is very different from gas, where you kind of heat up, you would heat ourselves up and then within a couple of hours it'd be cold again, you'd do the same thing again. Whereas at the moment, we just sit in a blissful 19 degrees, no matter the weather, which is wonderful. The heating's under the floor, so you can't really see that.
The smaller the house you have, the smaller the heat pump. We need a large one, but not all houses do. So that it can cope down to -15 without any problems. It's sucking air in, heating up the hot water, taking the heat out of that air, and then expelling the cold air, the waste cold air. So it's effectively a fridge. So this is a really, really tried and tested technology. And as with any technology, it will just keep improving. And it's less noisy than the birds buzzing around the garden as well.
Yeah, we're going to go outside and see the heat pump. It's kind of a whirring, gentle whirring in the background. The neighbours haven't complained. They say it doesn't bother them, so yeah. The heat pump sends the hot water to the tank, and it goes up to the manifold and then on up to the floor and the radiators upstairs. I spent many hours trying to find the most energy efficient appliances, given we were going to be fully on electricity. So we try and cook during the day. I try and run the washing machine and the dishwasher during the day because we don't have a battery yet. We couldn't afford a battery. We try and make an effort to use what we can.
So we had the exact same size radiator here before, but a double panel. Now it's a triple panel. It provides a higher level of heat output for a lower flow temperature. So the room and this area gets just as much, if not more, heat from it, even though the system is running at a significantly lower temperature than it used to with the gas boiler. And where the old flue was for the gas boiler, past the clothes, it's not been used yet by any birds, but I built it to cover up the hole where the flue used to come out from the old gas boiler. I thought it'd be quite a nice end to the end of a gas flue, was make it a home for nature.
We already know there's more rain in Scotland today
Yes.
than there was in the 1960s, for example.
Yes.
Significantly more.
Yes.
And the rain
Yes.
now is already more intense, and it's going to get
Yes.
more and more intense.
Yes.
Short, sharp bursts
Yes.
of rain.
Yes.
So gutters, for example, aren't
Maybe
big
much
enough.
bigger.
Yeah, the buildings opposite have the gutter sitting on top of the stone there. They don't sit proud of the stone wall, as it's quite common. It's similar to the building I'm in, yeah. I mean, if there's an inherent issue with the building that's known until it's rectified to insurers, it may be difficult to even sell the flat, which is a concern for myself and my wife. The one with the collapsed ceiling, but this is a basement of a local shop.
Out here, I don't see that there's, I don't know if there's a drain underneath that, but there's so much dirt in terms of just maintenance of the street that I can't see where the drain is. Do you know what I mean? Directly outside our shop. So if there was a rainfall and this was all going to overspill onto the pavement, it's just going to gush right into the shop. Yeah, there's a few inches of couple of inches of step up, but that just comes straight in underneath our door. We're a registered charity that retails second-hand children's goods, as well as distributing packs to families who need additional support. We have a crate sale going on at the moment where you can fill a bag for £5. We have weaning and feeding equipment. We have cloth nappies. So there's an old drain in the flooring down here somewhere. That drain backs up and it comes up through the flooring. It comes up through the walls. So flooring had to get replaced, pulling out the plasterboard, skirting, new concrete screed done in our event space and our office and family space. We're being asked to put in flood mitigation, but we would have to at least come up this high. You can see how much stock we store down there. We need storage space. We are going to do our best and put in the efforts to be able to bring merry-go-round back. And our team are really great, but there's a clause in our insurance policy that basically says that if you don't have receipts for your stock, that they will not pay out for that. When it's a charity shop and it's donations, how do we maintain receipts for those? We can't really. The repairs that we're getting done through the factor is the roofing and the guttering, which didn't vastly affect us, but it affects, you know, the residents above us. That's their homes, and I can't imagine what they must be going through emotionally and mentally every time it rains.
That was the sign painters who were in the basement next door, who have now moved away. The first time we flooded was 2021. It was summer, we were coming out of the series of lockdowns during the global pandemic. We experienced a number of heat waves and then in August, flash flooding. I was basically told that it wouldn't happen again and not to worry about it. In 2023, we had our second and third instances of flooding, and this time around it affected many more properties on the street. We named it after our great aunt and our grand, that's Bunty and Margaret, hence the name. They are the reason that we love vintage clothing, they're the reason that we love coffee and cake, and this property actually looks very much like my Aunt Bunty's house did when we were growing up. And actually, this whole row up here is all stuff that came from either Bunty or Margaret. So you just wheel your ladies out of the way, and you've got a nice little section here, and I don't know if you can see that, Lou, but wellies are just on the right hand side and the pump is just here, and that's our bag of towels. The first 5-10 minutes, it's very, very slowly making its way across. Out the back is much higher up, and the kind of area between our building and the garden fills up first. And then once that fills up, there's basically nowhere for the water to go except into our property and other properties along the street. And so the water comes in very slowly to start with, but then very, very fast. On all 3 occasions it's happened, the water has come in through the back wall and up through the floor. The second and third time was much worse because it came in through the bathroom, it came in through the toilet, through the sink. The whole street was declared a biohazard by Environmental Health. Every time it happens, you feel like you're just back to square one again. It almost feels like an exercise in futility, because we know that there hasn't been wider action taken by the government or by the council to prevent it happening again. So the idea of relaying the floor and repainting and, you know, getting everything back to normal feels almost insane. There are currently properties on the street where the basements are empty. Yeah, we don't get a lot of information about what's actually going on. And if I'm honest, I couldn't really tell you who's responsible for preventing this from happening in the future. half of the drains, for example, are owned by the council and they're responsible for maintaining them, and half of the drains are owned by Scottish Water and they're responsible for maintaining them. Yeah, it's not really knowing what's being done and by who and whether it will make a difference or not.
We see workers out on the street putting like rods and things down the drains. I don't know what they're doing, but I don't think that anything has been solved or done. And it's really difficult every 2 years if this happens. It's like, oh, we're back again. It's not a problem that we can fix.
So between us 3 blocks, shared cost of these repair works to our block plus the 2 next door is in the region of £36,000.
We are now 8 months after the event and I am still in discussion with the insurance. By the time I finish dealing with last year's event, I'll be just getting ready to deal with this year's event. It doesn't go away.
These old buildings, too expensive to maintain, supposedly, but also too precious to demolish. So we need to sort of decide whether we're going to keep these buildings going or not, modernise them or get rid of them.
We've got this funding to do a case study, like an experiment, with a tenement in the East End. It's 8 flats, very ordinary mid-terrace sandstone tenement, with the usual sort of backlog of maintenance things and all the sort of upcoming needs, like, you know, gutters and roof and everything. And what we've been looking at is what would it take to not only deal with the maintenance issues, which is a huge sort of cooperation issue for the owners anyway, but also to do the things we know are necessary to deal with, you know, for addressing climate change. So this book, you know, is fantastic because it's got these pictures of how to do the social side of things, like how to have an owners association meeting or a stair association meeting, it was called then. But it's also got these fantastic illustrations of how the building is put together. All the jargon, flashings, flaunchings, haunchings.
Oh God, that's so poetic sounding, isn't it? I like that. John redrew these and put them on under one roof. You know, what we say is we give impartial, independent advice to owners and their advisors. And that's what we're doing.
Should you have a rocking chair or a normal chair?
Okay, tell me something about the owners. So, are they all on board with this?
I think we're at the side where that kind of pole bit is. There's a crack in that pole and you can feel when like the wind coming in there. So obviously it's a difficult place to insulate. You can feel the draft coming in the windows. So I don't know if that's the same with other flats, but obviously it's the place where we lose the most heat.
Well, this was all initially triggered by a letter from manufacturers about the front fabric of the building. And that would be my primary concern at the moment, as the second worst piece of stonework is underneath the window next door, which belongs to me. So that's what I want to see dealt with. If the front of the building falls on the drive, then it doesn't matter how many heat pumps you have in the back court. I don't have particular concerns about the heating, insulation, or efficiency and things like that.
I mean, I always start these problems by talking about the owners. You know, I mean, if you're a professional, you often turn around and think the owners are problems. But in fact, the owners have problems. And one of the problems they have is trying to get every other owner on board. But you've got 8 owners, all at totally different life stages and life circumstances.
It'd be nice to have some concrete actions that we can take out of this and as a collective block make some decisions. I guess the concept of this is to create a case study, but we've got an existing stonework repair thing that we need to get done on the front wall of the building.
Okay, so what the law says is that maintenance decisions are majority decisions. So you just need, I presume you've got 8 flats in the block. If 7, even if just 5 vote for it, then the others have to go along with it.
So the law is about maintenance, but that also covers
It
insurance.
covers the management of the tenant, of the tenement.
Yeah.
So it covers the paying of the factor, or the gardening, or the painting, or stair cleaning, or insurance. If the building, you know, the facade falls off the front of the building just because you haven't maintained it properly, you don't get insurance for it.
Yes.
So in some ways, people worrying about the insurance, it's legitimate in case there's a fire. But, you know, if they think the insurance is going to pay up if the front of the building falls off here because they haven't maintained it, I don't think that...
Yeah.
Neighbours just next door recently they all had to move out because the whole block was becoming unstable. And I went up the stairwell a few times and you can see the massive cracks along the walls and things.
So if you're going to touch the building to do something with maintenance, is there something you can do for insulation? And if you're doing that anyway, can you go a bit further to further reduce your bills or be a bit more comfortable? And so we've got consultants, we've got John Gilbert Architects to help on fabric and maintenance. And we've got Luth Services, so building services engineers, looking at options on heating.
Future-proofing these people.
Future-proof it. The last attempt to really solve this was in 2011. So in 2011 there was a surveyor's report which says this stuff needs attention.
And nothing's been done.
Nothing's been done.
Yeah,
13 years later they're back trying to do it again.
Yeah. Presumably they don't have a factor.
They do have a factor.
They do? Okay. And is the factor on board?
The factor is being a factor, and it's...
Okay.
The quotes they've received are based... Well, in fact, they've been described by the factor as cosmetic, whereas I think it's, you know, between the architects and everyone else, we think actually it's a structural issue now. What would a 10-year plan look like? Is that what we're going to try and... Is that the kind of... the mission? That's what... Would that be interesting? There have been revolutions with existing buildings in the past.
Yeah. Someone has to do it first, and that's never going to be pretty, and it might be time-consuming and costly, but then it creates a bit of momentum. And I kind of think of it similarly to when, I think it was in the Gorbals, they were really thinking about demolishing all the tenements because they couldn't think of a way to put like internal bathrooms in. There was this one person who got an architect who was just like, well, can you see if you could like move this wall or like put in a little like section and then put a toilet in? And they did it, and then they were like, oh, well, we don't have to demolish all the tenements. And then that just got...
That's all it needed, was one person to stand for up and say, I want it. Annie Gibbons in Govan turned up at the door and said, laddie, I've heard you talk about it, I want one. It was replacing the toilet and the stair. 1 in 4 households in Scotland were sharing toilets and stairs. Annie was great because Annie allowed our house to become a show house, and over 700 people traipsed through Annie's loo. We then had to organise around her to make sure that the person above her was happy to have the pipes through, people below, and so actually we ended up with the 3 houses getting a new bathroom in. This whole network of housing associations were driving this forward with local authority and very much with government support as well.
You know, when you start talking about doing community-based things for insulation, that's the model you're following.
Yeah, we're really interested.
Yeah, and people actually looked at them and said kind of the ideal number of owners to work around or tenants to work around is about 200. You know, it seems to be kind of a magic number, about 200. And probably if you were to look at a tenement block going around a square, you know, you'd probably be around that number. And if you put your heat pump down in the middle of that, and you've got your own heat network locally, you know, you're getting very close to that community-based housing association model.
So we shouldn't give up on tenements. We should bring them up to date for the new era.
Yeah, because if they could do it then, we could do it now.
And from the 1 in 4 people sharing a toilet in 1970 to 1991, I was able to tell Scotland that we were the best toileted nation in Europe. Why? We put our mind to it. We said, as a nation, we're going to do this. we put resources to it.